The Senate took a big step toward easing crisis-era restrictions on the banking industry yesterday when it passed on a bipartisan vote changes to Dodd-Frank. One of the key architects of the legislation is Senator David Perdue, Republican from Georgia, and Senate Banking Committee member. We welcome Senator Perdue now back to Bloomberg. Welcome, Senator. It's always good to have you with us. Thank you for your time.
Good morning.
So first of all, congratulations. You've been a big proponent of this. You've been an author of parts of it as well. We're going to put up a full screen that really shows the basic changes having to do with systemically important financial institutions and a restriction on that, also the Volcker rule for small banks. But what I really want to know is what's most important to you in this legislation?
Well, first of all, the president last year said job one is getting the economy going, right? And one of the things you have to do is free up the capital that was locked up by the prior regulations and controls. So there were over $6 trillion of capital not at work in the economy. That's a big deal. $2 trillion on the small community banks and regional banks balance sheets. So I think the number one thing that we did was we changed the reserve requirements, and also lowered the regulatory burden on small community banks and regional banks. And I think that's going to have a huge stimulative approach on Main Street America.
So, Senator, there's no doubt that that's going to help a lot of banks, particularly the smaller, the regional and community banks, no question. But is it going to help the banks, or is it going to change their behavior in terms of lending money? I mean, do they put that in their pocket, or do they put that back out to work?
Well, look, both are stimulative, frankly, because if it goes back in the pocket, it gets reinvested. We know that it's like dividends. But here's the answer to your question. Small community banks and regional banks had nothing to do with the 08 and 09 crisis. We know that. And yet they got wrapped up in this sweeping, blunt instrument called Dodd-Frank. Now, look, I'm excited about this bill that we passed yesterday. We fought hard for this in the Banking Committee and on the floor of the Senate. It went through regular order. We had amendments in the committee. We had amendments on the floor. And we had a bipartisan approach to this. We don't do that very often in the Senate today. So this is a remarkable accomplishment. And frankly, on the back of what we did last year, this is going to be a tremendous addition to driving the economy forward. And I believe that right now, you're going to see a lot of this money find its way into small businesses in small town America, which is what we want.
So, Senator, no question, a bipartisan effort these days in Washington is a major accomplishment. I don't want to let that be gainsaid. But let me come back to exactly what the effects are on the economy. Do we really need a lot more lending going on in the economy right now, given where we are in the business cycle, which you know so well? You were a CEO of a very big company. Do we really need that? Is there any danger we may be overstimulating?
Well, there's always that danger when you take, and I said this all the time last year, when you take the jackboots of an oppressive federal regime off the throats, really, of business, you get a pop. And that's what we've seen. Most of the benefit that we're realizing today in the economy comes from the regulatory work last year. But in addition to that, we have energy work that was done last year, as well as the tax changes that you well know about. And so we've got an activity-based situation right now where our economy is moving, people are getting back to work, but we still have a low level of workforce participation. So there's room to grow there. And what we've got to do, though, is open up foreign markets and grow our exports as well. So it could be overheating, but I really don't think so. I think this is just a natural reaction in the cycle to the overregulation period that we had for the last decade.
So I want to pick up on trade, which you just raised, but before that, you particularly were interested in the restrictions on mortgage lending by smaller banks, which have now been eased under this new statute that when it makes its way into law. How do we make sure we don't go back to the bad old days of 2005, 2006, 2007?
Well, most of the mortgage problems we had, honestly, were created back in the late 90s by the Clinton administration when we first started. They wanted to increase home ownership. Who could be against that? But what we did is we changed the underwriting rules, and what that did is that created an imbalance in the system. And then later we saw what Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae did, and then we saw what Wall Street did to leverage this up. And so the crisis occurred. The banks that we're talking about, small community banks and regional banks, were really not contributors to that crisis. So I'm not worried about that at all. I think we've got enough rules left in Dodd-Frank that protect against that in a big way.
Well, one that the Wall Street bankers are going to want to see rolled back is the leverage rate, the coverage ratio, the leverage ratio. They want to get pared back from 6% to 3%. Are we going to see that in the final bill that's going to hit President Trump's desk?
Well, I hope so. I think you'll see the House will probably put that forward. I'm a proponent of that, frankly. I mean, look, Basel III is a disaster, in my opinion, because we're unilaterally moving. We're the only signatory country in that agreement that's actually moved. And so we want to create a level playing field. President Trump talks about that all the time. So I hope we will take that up. We wanted to be very measured in this Senate bill, though. I mean, we just don't pass many bipartisan bills today in this Senate. And so this is one that brought 17 Democrats and 50 Republicans Republicans together and passed a bill that really will stimulate the banking industry.
Finally, Senator, just one quick moment on trade, which you raised. I mean, you're from the state of Georgia. You run companies that are really dependent upon it in foreign trade. There's some concern right now that the White House may be going more and more conservative, as it were, on trade, more and more hostile to free trade. To what extent are you concerned about that?
Look, I'm always concerned about trade. I've been involved in it my entire career, working across borders, transferring product back and forth. America has always been a trading country, and what this president is saying, his instincts are correct, and that we need a level playing field. If you want access to our markets, we want access to yours, and we want legal activity. We don't want dumping. We don't want government subsidies. We want a level playing field for our workers and our companies, and that's what he's trying to do now.
Okay. Thank you so much, Senator, for being with us. As Republican Senator David Perdue of Georgia.